Nice to be here with you to talk about Houdini and how we build worlds with Houdini at Ubisoft. I've been working at Ubisoft Paris since 2011. We started to work to introduce Houdini in production in 2012. And with this presentation, I'll take you along all the steps we had to build a full Houdini pipeline to create our world. Through two different projects, Ghost Recon Wildlands and now Ghost Recon Breakpoint, which have been announced and is going to be released soon. So this talk is mostly about Wildlands, but a lot of it applies to Breakpoint. To start, just a short video. What are we talking about when it comes about world building with Houdini? It's a huge terrain, few hundred kilometers square. It's 11 biome, 140 materials. Now I'm going to hammer you with a few numbers, but we'll develop just after. It's a huge 8 map for the terrain, 32K by 32K, 32-bit 8 map, built on 4 layers. It means we have to maintain that on hard drive for everyone daily to recompose the final 8 map for the game. It's something like 300 river and lake area all across the world, all generated and built with Houdini. So both the lake, the river, the stream flowing down to the lake and everything. Of course, Houdini help a lot to maintain the consistency of the world. It's going to be a key word all along this presentation. It's about 1 million of trees and millions of bushes and rocks spread all across the world. We have over 600 kilometers of roads, 2,000 kilometers of footpaths, all generated. Of course, all the roads and those footpaths come with their special props, all the crash barrier, all the decals, all the sign, all the everything that needs to come with that. It's the same strategies apply to railway, with railways going all across the world, and everything is instancing, all placed with Houdini, of course. It's more than 400 locations on Wildlands, and about 60 of them are fully generated settlements, and we'll come back to that with a demo of the tool. We are going to talk a lot about instancing. Every village, every placement basically is a single instance. So when we are going to talk about one building, it's lots of instances gathered together, and it's going to be the same for bridges, tunnel, and all of that. So we are going to go through a different topic. How did we start with Houdini? What were our first steps, and how did we convince ourselves that there was a great potential for us to adopt Houdini to build bigger and better game? Then once we started with this statement, how did we build the Ghost Recon Wildlands pipeline, which is now our current pipeline, and we built Breakpoint with it. A few short topics about procedural opportunities, because we're going to talk a lot about visual, how we place objects, how we terraform the terrain, how we create a lot of visual, but it's not only that. We managed to go further than that with Houdini. A bit of back-end pipeline, so that's boring for some people, but very interesting for some others, so I'll keep it for the end. Everything we had to build around as technology to put all the glue between our tool, our in-game editor, Houdini, and all the process. How did we start? It started in 2012 with a very, very basic tool. At the time, we were working on Ghost Recon Future Soldier, and we were building not open world, but game level. And there was some tasks that were very tedious for artists, like placing wires between poles was a nightmare, because when you're working on level-based game, the level is going to change often. You're going to have to readapt your content, to rebuild, to move stuff, and every time they were moving power. They had to rebuild all the wires. They were doing that in 3ds Max with a lot of steps. Nothing was automated. So I think at the time I built a tour in like in a day. I showcased that to one artist, and the day after they were all queuing up, asking me to just process their level, to just generate all the network and all the wires. So it worked, and we thought, oh, there's something here. How can we push that further? So we started to build more tools to expose the right parameter. First, it was all kind of hard-coded, just a bunch of nodes, but then we managed to build OTL, have a nice clean interface, so we were able to process the stuff faster. We started to process terrain because it was a lot of polygonal modeling either for the terrain at the time, which is not the case now, fortunately. But it was a lot of unwrapping UV, complex situation with this kind of nightmare for artists. The same, if you want to build the road, you have to rebuild all your UV by hand and everything. So all of that was generated with Houdini. The terrain was giving me his terrain with just a few curves, and I was able to just generate all the section of roads, connect everything, sweep it nicely, stitch the border, generate the UV, give the terrain back with UVs and material and everything placed accordingly. So it was a game changer and a time saver. And we started to focus on the pre-production of our next game at the time, which were going to be Ghost Recon Wildlands, which was released 2 years ago now, but everything is still very, very relevant, I hope. So our first step was to rebuild our strategy to design terrain from scratch. So starting with Houdini, we started to work with 8 map, either 8 map generated with World Machine at the time, or digital elevation model files, so satellite data, to compose new terrain. And Houdini came very handy when it was to define all the texturing mask. Sort out the terrain according to slope, to curvature, to the placement of the forest, of different model of the 8 and everything, and generating a few masks, a few texture masks, vertex color, to just display, I think it was 16 material at the time. And we had a nice prototype of what was going to become our model for the terrain. Ultimately, we did not use meshes, but a full 8-map solution generated at runtime. But everything we prototype here with Houdini about how we wanted to distribute texture and what was working and not working, Houdini was a great tool for that. So it's useful for prototyping and in production. We started to prototype for distribution a lot, because we're going to talk a lot about distributing assets on top of the terrain. And the first case, obviously, is vegetation, distribute point according to the same rules we talked previously, height, altitude, slope, all of that, according to material. And we had to export all of that to our terrain. And we realized that Houdini was very, very flexible. It was the first time we had to put our hand into a little bit of scripting. And I like to show this one because it's super dirty. It takes a lot of lines to do something that should be very easy. Even the text file is a nightmare, but that was our first exporter to export kind of a matrix to the game, and we were able very quickly to give that to a developer. Okay, that's a list of points for our vegetation, sort that out in engine, and we were able to it was taking like 0.1 second to just refresh in engine and update all the vegetation. So Houdini was open on one side, editor on the other screen, export the text file, reload on the other side, and we were able to iterate and refresh all the vegetation. It sounds quite easy because you might think, oh yeah, we've been distributing vegetation in games for like forever. But before that, we were placing trees by hand, one by one. But it was still one direction, a bridge from Houdini to the editor. So it was obvious at this time that we would need in production to go both ways. At this time, we started to talk with SideFX about Houdini Engine, which was about to become a real product. And we were early adopter on that to start to integrate Houdini Engine in Anvil, our editor. We branched from Assassin's Creed at the time. And of course, there was no support for anything Houdini related. And our first step with Anvil was to completely integrate Houdini engine. So it means we can build a full network, we can create an HDA in Houdini. If you see all the parameters here, it's exactly the same parameter exposed on the other side in Anvil. So the tech artists are now able to build tool in Houdini and distribute the tool, and artists without any previous knowledge of Houdini, they can just manipulate slider, input curve, and generate content. And then we worked on the bidirectional bridge with Houdini 2 editor. We found it was not easy at first because Houdini relies on Python. Our editor was based on .NET. So we started to investigate and fork from Python.NET library for Python. So we are now able to completely use the .NET assembly directly with Python in Houdini, but not only, from any Python shell. And it's our solution to exchange data between both now. So to read and write mesh, to export data, to push stuff, we can do everything. This is just one basic example if the video is gonna work, and it's not. So we are not gonna have any video, les gars. What a shame. So basically, when I move the camera in Houdini, it moves the camera in. When I move the camera in Anvil, the camera moves in Houdini. So I can really replicate. It's just sending the camera matrix to one or each other, but but it's a basic application. And if you work with that, you can work with everything else. Wildland, we made the math at the end. It's about 80% of the world has been distributed and generated with Houdini. A lot of instances, but the rest, the 20% left, of course, are carefully handcrafted. So it's a lot of settlement. It's where all the gameplay situation happen and everything. Wildland, you can guess by the name, it's a lot of landscape, and it works very well for that. Mostly, we use Houdini to deal with texture and 8 map a lot, instancing heavily, and meshes a bit. Mostly the water plane, river, stream, meshes, or the arbitrary surface. And that was it. I'll give you another example. Now we are doing more stuff with meshes, but it was not trivial to completely integrate perfectly. How do we get the terrain? Because you understood that the most important for us, if we are going to distribute a lot of points, a lot of instances, is to have access to the terrain and to have something very efficient to do it. So basically, it's just a few lines of Vex. We try different ways to do it efficiently because what you need to know is we store the terrain on the hard drive as tile. So it's 1024 tile for the full terrain, multiple layer, but 1024 tile. So what is this doing? It's just for one point, find the world position, find the tile position it belongs to, and this tile retrieves the UV position. And then with that, concat the name of the tile on the drive, load the texture, fetch the texture, and apply the value, the color of the texture to the point and display the point. That's it. And yeah, it was in VOP first, but it doesn't work better in Vex, but it's more readable at the end because that's just a short snippet. But you'll see that we have many layers. So at the end, it's a lot of stuff. Because yes, we have a lot of layers to the terrain. That's our fetch terrain node. So that's how we get the terrain. And you see that we can get the terrain, but we can get the sunlight, we can get the texture, we can get the road, the flow map, pretty much everything we are going to need to scatter all our instance on top of our terrain. And how do we maintain that? Because everyone is working on the terrain at the same time. On peak of production, we can have 50 people working all across one single level, one single world, all skirting and pushing terrain with in-house tool. So the solution we have is every time someone modifies the height map of the terrain, and through the normal pipeline of submitting a terrain, submit a modification, submit to Perforce, we have a process which catch the change list and trigger some Houdini job to recompute all of that. So every time we push a height map, we are sure that 5 minutes after, more or less, the build farm will have regenerated the average position of the sun, terraforming if needed, the flow map, and everything we are gonna need for other process. So we are saying this one works because it's a GIF, good old technology. So that's a lot of points. That's the 10 millions of points we were talking about, and all the instances spread all across the world. So you can really read the shape, but it's not it's really one object per point. So that's mostly what we do with Houdini. We place point, we define position, orientation, and for each point we save a matrix, a key to one object in the big file, in the game editor, and then the magic happens. The video is not gonna work. So I guess we have to skip. That's a bit of a shame, but no, well, I tried all of that before, and I have a PC with it running, but okay. Pathfinding. We, of course, for such a huge terrain, we needed to create a lot of roads to connect all the locations together. And we couldn't afford to dedicate all the artists to place trajectory and point and change their mind all the time. Because also the drawback when you give artists a lot of control on what they can do, like give them a tool to create curve and create all the roads, you also give them the opportunity to change their mind all the time. You will give them the opportunity to not all work the same way, because everyone on the floor, probably every artist will have his own idea of what a road should be, how much it should turn, what should be the slope and stuff like that. Using a tool, in this case, and like in many other cases, help to maintain the metrics and help to maintain consistency everywhere. So we decided to use pathfinding to generate road, and it was even before SideFX added the pathfinding node to Houdini. So the first prototype was just some Python code to pathfind along a grid. So of course we are familiar with pathfinding in making game, because that's what the AI are using to find their destination. But using that for world building was quite innovative at the time. One key finding, if you want to try that, is obviously if you're going to pathfind on top of a grid, you're going to get this kind of result. So it's appealing, but not really. And if you just smooth the curve, you're not going to match to the terrain anymore, or you're going to create some inconsistency with a road going up and then going down and whatever. So the trick is just to use an anisotropic grid, and instead of looking in 4 directions, look in how many directions as you need, because you can extend the grid. And then, of course, the computations are a bit more expensive, but it works much more better, and it really sticks to the topology. After that, of course, you need to terraform and everything, but that basically terraforming is kind of a attribute transfer, nothing more. It had to be a collaborative work, of course. So that's what the road network would look like. It's a good example of how to define a pathfinding-based network. Of course, it's all just trade segment connecting the point of interest in the world, and then running the algorithm. It will connect all of that with clever trajectory, accurate trajectory. We can tweak all of that. that's the point, to define how much the curvature tolerance of the road, if it's gonna turn a lot or not, and use any existing road to connect other roads. So I mean, if I already have generated some road, on the next iteration, I want the next road to use the previous one and not just to try to wander around and go straight to the position, because the shortest path would probably be to connect to an existing road to then go to the objective. The river and the railways were kind of on the same model, finding the best trajectory. And what was interesting was to put all of that together and to get some emerging results. Here, we never design these overlapping railways on top of the road and the water flowing under the everything and stuff like that. It just happened because everything had to cross at the same point, and the curvature tolerance of the railway is not the same as the one of the road, and we have some overlapping rules for the river and the road. If the river is large enough, we are going to generate a bridge over it. It will also, of course, affect the pathfinding cost, but if it's just a little stream, it's gonna stop at the road, place an object like a big concrete tube, and place another tube just after the road and flow through. A very nice video showing the algorithm in. Yeah. Bah, si tu arrives, mais je sais pas pourquoi l'heure. Vas-y, essaye. Parce qu'elle tournait super bien. Si on fait un truc plus style. Tac. On va appliquer. Ça, il le voit. Si on passe. Tu vois, là, elle marche. Ouais. Sinon, c'est peut-être le mode présentation qui fait chier. J'ai pas besoin du mode présentation, je peux le mettre en mode normal. Hein. Ouais, bah ouais, tu cliques dessus. Ouais. Mortel. So the pathfinding, you can see it's very jittery, but who cares because it's gonna be static. Oh, I forget to add this one. Yes, so an example in the road, the trajectory, the terraforming, the texturing. It's very old, this one, but the principle is still there. The game looks better now, but. And of course, generating the trajectory, we save this trajectory so we can reuse it for further placement for all the electric line and stuff like that. Yep. So consistency. You couldn't tell who worked here or there, just the same global network. Instancing, a lot of instancing a bit of everything, whatever, garbage, trees, rocks, just works fine. And so when it comes to vegetation, it's very cool to work with Houdini and to experiment different solutions and different approach. There's a lot of very clever and very fun to use growing algorithm. You can try to simulate whatever you want. You can try to simulate the wind. You could use particle system to scatter some wind to let your vegetation grow, to scatter more seed and everything. It's fun to play with, but ultimately what you need is something that can be art directed. You need to be able to tweak the forest and to achieve whatever result you want. And you, even if you want to create some kind of emerging result, you don't want that. Like you place a seed and it starts to grow a bit of everywhere according to the specific nature of the soil and different rules that all combine together. And at the end, you don't really know what happened. And you certainly cannot ask an artist to modify the pH du soil, the pH of the soil, or whatever acidity, or the wind factor, and regenerate and try to find out something that's going to be no. So our solution is very classic, I would say. It just move a few parameters to define an area, define a mask, and inside this mask define some scattering rules. Hop. Si ça marche, on va passer en privé. So very direct approach in engine with Houdini, placing a trajectory and generating the stuff. And as you can see, it's very easy to iterate, to change your mind, to test different type of vegetation or whatever, until the art director is going to be happy and everyone's going to be satisfied with the result. Of course, instancing to place rocks all across the world, same kind of stuff, distribution mask, rules. If you're going to do that, and if you're going to do that for a game, be very careful about your model. The little story about that is we used concave meshes to scatter all the rocks all across the world. And it was looking very good. And we were never really walking across this area because forest was just a bunch of mountain with rocks and nothing to do. But by the end of the project, when all the QC team started to point all the bugs, in one day we just received thousands and thousands of bugs of players being stuck in the rocks, bits everywhere in the mountain. If you played Wildland, potential, it surely happened to you, and I apologize. But we managed to fix 30,000 of issue in less than a week. But we didn't want to change the model. We didn't want to regenerate all the work, all the rocks placement, because it was too late in production, and changing all of that had a lot of implication to the game. So what we did is to create a tool to calculate an occlusion of all the rocks placement to try to find all the cavity. And then instead of fixing to fix the problem, we just add more rocks. So we just filled the cavity with more rocks. Of course, it created more issue, but we rerun the tool and we placed even more rocks. And after a couple of iterations, we were mostly fine, and we kind of saved the rocks nightmare with that. Up, just because we can render pass and it looks good. Voilà. With and without. Yeah, one trick we found at the end, even if you're not in game development, you're probably familiar with level of detail for models. So for each model, we have 3 to 4 level of detail. Very important for all the vegetation, especially for trees, bushes, vegetation. After a certain distance, we just want to display a billboard. So just one face oriented to the player. And we build, because we generate all those data with Houdini, of course, we have the control. We have the control to analyze this data and to modify it. So that's a kind of a heat map of the global density of the vegetation. And we assume that where the density is huge, if there's a lot of model, of course, performance are going down. And that's something we need to sort out. But also, if there's a lot of density, you probably care less of the detail of one single instance. So we are able to balance the level of LOD based on the density per point. And it worked quite well. Working with instancing, it's not only placing points, sometimes it's a gathering point all together to assemble structure. So we said that with the road, we were able to generate tunnel and bridges, per se. So that's one instance of a procedurally generated bridge. So we work with different modules, and the tool, the pathfinding tool, will generate the trajectory, and then another tool will take over and generate the bridge, placing those modules. What is there? So instancing, yes, but it requires some good communication between the artists to set up everything, because it's a lot of back and forth. What's the right size of the bridge? But working with module and working procedurally allow all of that. We can change our mind, and it's easy enough to update hundreds of bridges all across the world, because we decided that now a small bridge is not 6 meters wide, but it has to be 7.5 for some reason, and it happens literally every day. So we can create a lot of variation also with just a few modules. Of course, instancing saves memory. It's more consistency. It's not every artist is gonna build according to his own metrics or his own rules. That's it. So yes. So a tool in action, because the tool can be triggered automatically, but we can also use it manually if we need to do anything custom. That's a railroad placement, so the trajectory, the terraforming, the railroad, the bridges, the tunnel, and the vegetation. Everything was procedurally placed. So it's a lot of instancing, but it's also a bit of parametric modeling would apply to what we've seen with the bridge. But we are also building meshes, and that's what I'm going to show you. Okay, it's not the most visually appealing stuff, but it's be careful, the guy who made it is in the zone, but it's very useful in production, because what we are doing here is we are building a shell for a house, for a building, with the exact metrics we need for the game. So when we are talking about game metrics, which I'm doing a lot, mean all the windows need to be at the same height, because we want the player to be able to climb over, or if it's going down, we want him to be able to crouch and to shoot. All the door frame have to be an exact size and shape. We like to have all our chamfer done at the same width. We like our texture to be able to fit exactly in a very defined space, one texture for that much text every 4 meters and stuff like that. So we want our ceiling to be at a consistent height and everything. So working like that, just for the shell of the building, ensure that all those metrics will be respected and consistent. And then we can the UV will be generated, which is always a pain. And we'll also generate some small decal, some small mesh sweep all across the junction of the floor and wall to just place some dirt or whatever we need. And of course, the work's not going to end up with this shell, because on top of that, we'll be able to place a lot of instances, mostly manually, so the artist will be able to dress his building and to create a group, a prefab that we are going to be able to reuse in different contexts. But the shell is exactly what you've seen before, with just the right texture and a few modules on top of it. Settlements. So this one, it's a huge tool, and it's a good example because it's kind of the combination of what we've just been talking about, the generating trajectory, placing instant, creating building, and all of that. So early in the development of this game, we were talking about, oh, wow, and if we were able to generate village and place building and stuff like that. So that's a very, very early test, years and years ago. And so it's very naive approach. And it works well with a couple of nodes, and it looks good from the distance. But when you're in there, nothing is consistent. Every building has this specific orientation. It's a mess, and it's not possible to sort it out correctly. So we had to rethink the whole thing and to really define what we wanted to do with a tool that was going to be able to be controlled by different artists, to sort different keys, to help with different purpose all across the world, different setting and everything. So we wanted to be able to handle different size, different setting, to have a lot of control, of course. The tool had to be easy to set up, and it was not only about placing building, but also terraforming, pre-terraforming the landscape before placing the building, and AI support, which means all along the road we want to generate all the trajectory for the sidewalk. We want to place some helpers for activities for NPC and stuff like that. So before creating a tool, usually we ask ourselves, what are we talking about? So if we are talking about a village, it's a location. It's an internal structure, so very likely the village is going to connect to a road, to a main road going nearby. It's an internal structure of network, road, sub-road, path, and zoning, internal zoning with districts, starting from the center of the village, which is going to be able to have different themes. Maybe the center is going to be old or modern or whatever, but there's the center. And some outskirts who are going to be less likely field or suburbs or whatever. So that's what the tool does. Connect to the closest road, create the internal network, define the zone, define the building lots, and then place the buildings. But for that, for this specific part, place the building, we realized that we needed complex rules. It was not enough to just give a list of all the buildings available, because what do we want in this case? You very likely want to place the church at the center of the village or on the highest point. You want the farm to be placed on the outskirts. You want the shop to be placed along the main avenue. So for each building, we define a kind of template, which is based on a big spreadsheet with the placement rules. So this specific building cannot be placed in an agriculture area, can be placed in a high density location, cannot be placed just too close to the same building of the same type, and so on and so on. So each building comes with its own card, and each city comes with its own preset system to define which buildings are going to be placed in which location. And of course, and it worked quite well. So that's a basic placement, but with already some complex rule. And we were able to build some very small village to much more larger stuff. And you can see that there are some specific zonings. Tool is not able to build an airport, but with this tool, as with many others, we are able to define some exclusion zone and tell the tool, do not generate anything in this area. We want to do it by hand. The tool can handle aligned building, non-flat terrain, and different kind of stuff. So short video demonstrating the tool in Anvil. So it's all very nice to be able to build that much content, but on the back end, it's a bit more complicated than that, because it's a lot of different layers, a lot of different type of data, a lot of different people working at the same time, maybe on the same location. So how we handle all of that, all those layers that have to be all connected, all dependent to each other. And yet another video. because we are talking about roads, about placement along roads, about vegetation, all the decal, all the proxy. So from the road terrain to the footpath, vegetation, rock placement, poles. That's by hand because it looks nice. The river flowing with the proper UV and flow map, of course, to drive the shader. Procedural villages. We've seen this one. It works on a very global scale. Subtractive workflow, asynchronous update. I like this one. We generate everything we can. Basically, it means the vegetation artist, the rock artist, the artist in charge of creating the roads, or the one who is sculpting the terrain, or whatever. They can all work at the same time on the same location without talking to each other. So we are gonna spread vegetation everywhere without taking care of the road placement, of the rocks, or whatsoever. Same for every layer. And then we have a nightly process, a daily process. All of this work is saved to a specific cache. So it's not directly in the engine. It's not the vegetation you can see. It's just a list of matrix saved somewhere for the vegetation, the rocks, everything. And nightly, we just gather all the cache in an ultimate top Houdini tool and sort out all the rules. So basically, it's just playing Shifumi. The rock is gonna play against the vegetation. The roads is gonna play against the vegetation and the rocks, and so on. And there's many rules to catch. If there are some electric wires, we want to move the tree a bit or remove the tree, and so it works great to have collaborative work based on layer. And we don't have to maintain the vegetation rules accurate and everything, because we also take care of resnapping everything to the ground. So we are sure that every morning the most important is the game is going to run, and there's not gonna be any floating tree because someone sculled the terrain below it. So maybe the rules is not gonna be accurate, but there was a mountain and a vegetation rule for mountain at this place. Then the vegetation is just going to be snapped, but it's going to be consistent. Next time we'll regenerate the rules, it's gonna match better to everything we define and we want as a final result. But the objective is to maintain the quality on a daily basis. And it looks like that because we are doing it both for the texture and for the objects. So for the texture, it's about grabbing the mask and the altitude of the terraforming for the railway, for the roads, for the river, piling up all of that in COP and saving the final terraforming 8 map for the terrain. And that's for all the instance. Everything runs on a tile based. It doesn't mean that the tools themselves are tile-based. When we are going to create vegetation, it's an arbitrary curve. They can spread all across the world. But the cache itself that's going to be used here is saved per tile. If you had the presentation about PDG, that may sound familiar, and that's something that really follows the same strategy. So it's just what's going on with the layering and the compositing of texture. We use a lot of cache data, it means. So everything we generate with Houdini doesn't go directly in the game, doesn't go directly in the big file, which is where we store all the game assets. A lot of stuff just goes on a server as cached file. If you're working on post-production, or you might be very familiar using cache for simulation or everything. But for us, it was not a very familiar things to do, but it works. And of course, whatever is in the big file and editor as part of the game run into backed up data with control submit and versioning and everything. It's not the same for the cache, because whatever goes in the cache, we are supposed to be able to regenerate it as much as we need. So even if we crash the NAS or everything, we might lost 1 day of rebuilding the full database, but that's it. It doesn't worth versioning it. Procedural opportunities, because it's not only about visual, and because we know all the placement of all those objects, we supposed to have sound on this one, but it doesn't matter. Yeah. All the zoning for the ambient sound is generated using Houdini, because we know the placement of everything. We can generate a big texture and interrogate this texture at runtime. In fact, generate a meshes from this texture, and the mesh is going to be used at runtime to know what sounds to play wherever we are. We're running a bit short, so I'll go through it. We are using Houdini also to define specific area in the world. This is the map point placement, but each point comes with a radius, a slope, the curvature of the terrain at the location and stuff like that. So it means at runtime, this point cloud is available, and we can check around the player to find valid points, rather than sending a lot of rays and draining your CPU to try to find out where is the best spot to spawn an enemy or an activity or whatsoever. We already know what are all the best spots and what the size of activity or stuff we can spawn in every location. So it's a pre-analyze of the game to help computation at runtime. Because we have all those layers, we use Houdini to generate the world TAC map. So it's a lot of file, because it doesn't look like it, but there's a lot of information, and it's huge, and it's a giant scope to just, it's a giant network to just compute and composite everything. It's also a tool for debug and optimization. I've talked about the LOD multiplier, how we fix the cavity with the rocks, I could mention that we use some tool to check object badly placed too close to the road that was blocking AI and stuff like that. So a lot of tool for analytic and to help to debug. Talking about analytic, one final example about what we did around the end of the project, just after we released the game. We had the department of analytics who gave us this texture, the heat map of where the player were going across the world. And there's no detail, it's 1 pixel per 200 meters or something like that. But it happens that there's the full raw data with the accurate position, but there's no idea what to do with it. And in Houdini, it only took 2 nodes actually to do that. So a table import to import the 3 gigabyte CSV file to sort out, to just place all the points with their values, the number of players per given location, and the color node to remap the number of players on the color. Up, and in 5 minutes, the Houdini backend pipeline. Get ready. So we have to manage a lot of data, but a lot of assets. When we submit an OTL, it has to go to 3 different places, and it's very important to have the OTL in the big file available for the artists who are going to use the tool. The OTL is going to Perforce depot, because that's safe. And it's also going to the render farm $hash site, which is where all the OTL that are going to be used by the render farm belongs. To be sure that there's no mistake, because dropping your asset in 3 different places is not it's not going to go well if you don't add any safety. So a nice Perforce manager into Houdini. Look how sexy it is. We can sort out dependency, versioning. It includes a validation script to find out if some stuff were not named properly, or whatever rules we add to the validation process. World batch and render farm, because we do use render farm. Because we have long cooking time, we need to automate some job, because we have all these nightly rebuild I talked about. So that's world batch. So not so small now tool we develop to distribute jobs. So what you can do in world batch is to select a tile, or not select a tile, or select just a job, or a job according to some specific tile. Create a sequence of job if you need to. Create some blocker in between 2 sequences of jobs. So wait to have finished to do all of that before you move to the next process. And send that to the farm. We did Wayland with 12 computers. We are up to 30, something like that now. And we use it intensively. Yeah, so we can create a batch of jobs, which is really what you can do now directly in Houdini with PDG. And what we can do here is to schedule some job, to have some specific job running during lunchtime, because we are fortunate enough that we only work with other studios based across Europe mostly. So we can all sync in the morning and rebuild the data overnight. It became more complicated when you have to build with further away studios. So rebuild during lunchtime, rebuild during nighttime, specific rebuild during the weekend, and stuff like that. A lot of interconnected process, but just to sum up, but I've mentioned everything before. We were the first in Paris to start to use Houdini in production. Now I would say that it's vastly adopted. We have some people who are making games with Houdini in Singapore, in Montreal, in Quebec, in Toronto, in Newcastle, everywhere. All the studios, mostly. Of course, in Paris, Bordeaux, Annecy, and Montpellier. We love to work with SideFX. It's a great relationship. We have a good community at Ubisoft now, with a lot of internal events and stuff like that to be able to share. And we use Houdini for, of course, tool dev. There's a lot of pipeline to do. I'm saying all of that in case some of you might be interested. Levelast, of course, and more SFX. Weirdly, I didn't mention SFX, but we are now also using Houdini for SFX. To sum up, during the production of Wayland, it was 1,800,000 jobs sent to the render farm. Houdini is a great toolbox for prototyping ID. Not all the tools end up to be Houdini tools. Some stuff are going to be hard-coded directly in the editor because it makes more sense, like the terrain or other stuff. But a great toolbox for prototyping, for small tools, but also for complex tools. You've seen that with the settlement stuff. We don't need any developer, of course, to do all of that. Only skilled and good technical artists. We have one tool dev, but he helps us to integrate Houdini engine in the editor. We iterate fast. It's more than visual. And what are we going to do next and what we are experimenting now? Of course, PDG, to be even more efficient. Machine learning, because we started to do it a while ago. And with PDG, it became even more easier to bring external solution into Houdini. And I'm done with this last video of our latest stuff, because all of that was a bit old. So that's what we are working on now, and it's going to be out in October. Merci.
I think we have time for a couple of questions. Any questions? In the middle there.
Hi. Did you use the COP network to texture the terrain or Quixel Megascans?
To create the textures themselves, on Wayland, there's a bit of everything. There's a lot of handmade texture. There's some ZBrush, there's some Quixel, there's some photogrammetry we did ourselves. Really, we are very opportunistic and we use everything we can. It's true that now we use a lot of Quixel for the texturing itself. To sort out the texturing mask, we have a fully dedicated solution in editor to sort out the mask and stuff with a full GPU solution to address the large-scale terrain. Because Houdini is good now to work on 8 field, but working on a huge, I'm speaking 32K by 32K texture. Of course, even if you start to split it and stuff, we would have to rebuild a lot of stuff in Houdini, and we have an in-house solution for that. So all the mask sorting out.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
But I know some people at Ubisoft using Houdini to create the texture. Placing all the grass blade and small pebble and stuff of that, and rendering the occlusion map and all the channel. Yes.
Hello, amazing work. I want to know, so you used Houdini to instantiate models and many more, but did you use also the system to instantiate some particle systems like fog and more?
We are doing stuff with fog. We are generating a texture for the fog to generate the density, the elevation, and stuff like that. So it's a process that uses both the terrain and the composite everything for the volumetric fog. We use Houdini to place SFX across the game. So all the splash effect in the river, it's a process to analyze the river itself, the rock placement, and to just place point. And on those points, like we do with instancing, we are going to instantiate SFX. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Maybe one more question, if anyone has. Going once, going twice. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Benoit.